Hello everyone. In this video I am going to explain about dependency injection concept in Spring and an example on this concept. Let us start with an example and we will learn these concepts one by one. I have created a class called student. It has a reference to an interface called pen interface. Pen interface contains one method called write. So as you know, for an interface you can't create an object. So I have created two pen classes, Reynolds pen and Parker pen. So both these classes implemented this interface and overrides the write method. So basically these two classes meet the specification given by pen interface. So what does this pen interface specifies? Every pen should have a method called write. So two pen companies produced pen classes meeting this specification. So when you call write method, it will write the content onto the paper. So when you call a method called write, the content will be written onto the paper. So for this reference, I can assign any of the class that implements this interface. So it can be Reynolds pen or it can be Parker pen. So in this example or in this class student, there is a dependency for a pen object. So if student wants to write, he needs a pen. So basically student is having a dependency called pen. Only if he gets a reference to the pen object, then he can write something onto the paper, right? So student is having a dependency with pen object. Let us create one student. Student class contains a method called write. Okay, so whenever we call the write method on the student, it will call the write method in the pen. Okay, let us run this example. I have created a small example for this. I have created a student object and he wants to write something on the paper, and so he calls the write method in the student. Okay, so what this write method is doing, it calls the write method on the pen. Let us run this and see if we can able to write successfully the content. Can you see the null pointer exception? Because the student is having a reference to the pen, but this pen of reference is not having any pen object reference. So what we have to do, by default this will be null, right? So what we have to do, we can uncomment this. So in constructor, whenever I create a student object, I assign an object of Reynolds pen so that this will not be null. That means whenever you create a student, he will have a pen readily available, that is Reynolds pen. Let us test this. Previously we got null pointer exception. Now let us see the output. Can you see? So by default, whenever I create a student, the student constructor gets the object of Reynolds pen and assigns that to this reference. So by default student uses Reynolds pen. Okay, so every student by default uses this pen. So if I want to remove this, I can assign this reference in another way. Okay, How can I assign? I can assign like this. I create a pen object and I can assign the pen object like this. So this dependency I am resolving with setter method. In the previous example, I have resolved the dependency by creating an object in the constructor and assigning to this. But in this example, I am resolving the dependency with a setter method. I have a method called setPen. So this takes any object that implements this interface. Reynolds pen is an implementation for this interface. Okay. Now let us run this. The same output. We have seen two approaches for resolving the dependency. One is in the constructor, I am creating the pen object, and in this example, I am assigning the pen through the setter method. So basically, these are nothing but two types of injection in Spring. Let us see the Spring example, and then I will discuss these two topics. Okay. Now basically what we are doing here in this example, the student has a dependency. Okay. And if I want, by default this is using, the student is using Reynolds pen. If I want, to use another pen, then what I have to do, I have to modify the code here. So I have to change the implementation from Reynolds pen to, I have to say new Parker pen red Parker. Can you see? So if student wants to change a different pen, then again he wants to change the code. Okay, let us run this. Can you see? Now student is using Parker pen instead of Reynolds pen. So the implementation is now a different pen. Earlier we used a class called Reynolds, and now we are using Parker pen. So if student wants another pen, then what he has to do? He has to open the class and again he has to make the code changes, right? So you have to make code changes to the class. Instead of that, what Spring says is, don't modify the code here. Create a file. Okay, in Spring, what Spring says is, create your bean and specify the dependency. Means tell me that you want a student object and tell me that I want a pen, and whenever I load, means whenever container, there is a concept called container. In Spring, the container reads an XML file, understands the objects that need to be created, and at the time of creating the object, if there is any dependency, it will create that dependent object, and this dependent object will be injected by Spring to you. Okay. In the earlier examples, we are resolving the dependencies, but now can you see the control now shifts from this direction to this direction? Okay. What Spring says is, You want student object? Okay, tell everything what objects or what objects you want in an XML file, and I will take care of managing those. In Spring we will call them as beans. Can you see this declaration? Bean. For every bean we have to give an ID. It is nothing but a reference. So basically you can compare these three lines with this statement. Okay, this is called a reference. Here we call it as ID, and we have to specify the object class. Means whenever you say these three lines, whenever you say, it will create the Spring container. There are different types of containers. One of the container is application context. Application context, class path application context is one of the implementation for application context interface. What the class path application context performs is, whenever it sees the XML, it reads and understands the objects that need to be created. So when sorry, it reads this XML and creates the student object. And for student, we need to give a pen reference, right? So create pen object here. Okay, for pen we need, there is a property called pen color, right? Give like this, specify the pen color as green. Okay, and for the student we need pen object. For normal properties, means which are not objects, you can specify using value, but for specifying the object reference you have to use a ref. That means Spring will create an object called student, and whenever it sees a reference mypen, it understands that student needs a reference for pen object. Okay, then it will go to the mypen one. That means understands this and creates a pen object, and this pen object will be injected into the student. So basically this concept is called dependency injection. That means pen is a dependency. So Spring container application class path application context reads the XML and understands that student object need to be created by these three lines, and whenever it sees this ref tag, ref attribute, it understands that student needs a pen reference. So it will go to this declaration and understands that it need to create an object for Reynolds pen, and this need to be passed for the property called pen. There is a property called pen in the student, right? So for this property assign a pen object. So it, the value, it specifies another bean ID. Okay, now it will create another pen and injects that into the student. Now what we have to do is, we have to create the container object. Application context is the interface. Class path XML application context is an implementation for this application context. This is called container. Okay, whenever we create this object, pass this XML file, this container will read the configuration defined in the XML, and it understands that it has to create an object called student, and it sees the value ref and understands that it needs an object called pen and injects this pen object into student property called pen. So basically it will create a pen object, it will create a student object, and for the property called pen it will inject the object called my pen. Okay, let us run this. So basically this is the container. For the container, provide the XML file. It reads the XML file, understands that the student needs a pen called Reynolds pen. How it knows that it needs a Reynolds pen? Because you have given ID called mypen1. Mypen1 asking to create Reynolds pen. Okay, let us run this. Can you see? The container reads the spring.xml and it creates the student object and pen object, and the pen object is injected into the student object. In the earlier example, if the student wants a different pen called Reynolds pen, he has to change this line, right? But with the spring configuration, just change the value here. That's it. No need to change any code. If you want, if the student wants a different pen, just modify the value in the XML file and you need not perform any changes in the student class. Student class will be as it is. That is the advantage. The dependencies are injected and you can, in future, if you want to go to a different implementation, you can switch using simple change in the XML file. Let us run this class. Earlier we are using can you see? Earlier we are using Reynolds pen. If I want to, if the student wants another pen, just I modified here. If I modify back to Reynolds pen, see, I am not doing any changes in the student class. Just I am modifying the XML file. That's it. Can you see? So now the student uses Reynolds pen. So the advantage of this approach is, suppose in the real time, in the service layer, if you have the DAO reference and if you hard code to the JDBC DAO and you have to make so many changes to remove this dependency from JDBC implementation to Hibernate implementation. If you use interface like this, and without any DAO factory, we can switch from one implementation to another implementation by modifying the value in XML file. With Spring, we need not write any DAO factory to get a different implementation. Generally, in real time, we write a DAO factory to get the DAO implementation. So if you want to switch to another implementation, we will modify that in DAO factory class. But with Spring will take care of all these things and we need not create DAO factory. So that is the advantage. Hope you understand. Thank you.